So today, in the Reading Corner, we're talking to artist and picture book creator Oliver Jeffers, whose latest book, There's a Ghost in This House, is published this week. This is a book that I read as both playful and earnest, reassuring and questioning. A young girl invites the reader into a house where she has lived for a long time. She's been told that it's haunted, but she has personally never seen a ghost. As she searches the house, the reader is privy to a series of ghostly apparitions thanks to the clever use of semi-transparent pages. The young girl is oblivious to that. There is a final irony, which maybe we'll talk about as we get deeper into the story. So October's a good month to be publishing a ghost book.
Yes, October does feel like a very nice month for it, doesn't it? And I'm hoping that, as I say, a ghost book is for life, not just for Halloween.
I want to start with ghosts as our way in. There's a little note, just looking at the sort of text around your text. There's one that says, no, it doesn't come straight out and say whether you believe in ghosts or not. It says you believe that it's that scientific theory that energy never dies, it's simply transferred. So what appealed to you about the ghost story?
Well, I think I've always been interested in ghosts and ghost stories because I absolutely hate scary films. Can't do them at all. I was one of those traumatized children in the early 90s who watched that Ghost Watch, that Sarah Green was in, that the BBC got more complaints than anything else. And even the last one I attempted to watch, I think, was The Others, and I had to watch it with all the lights turned on at lunchtime from behind my hands. But there's something about ghosts. There's something about old houses and the history that lies there. And yeah, I think a lot of it does come down to energy and just, fear is associated with ghosts. But where that fear comes from, I think, doesn't get questioned very often. And while there is a fear, I suppose that it comes from the unknown, something we don't understand. But at the same time, I think people are intrigued by ghosts because we all like the idea that there's more to it than just this one little brief spell we get at being alive.
You do something very clever in this book, I think. Your ghosts are reassuring and they are playful and you don't feel that you're to be afraid of them. But at the same time, the book is quite unsettling. And I think that is to do with the house itself, which, it's called The Ghost in the House. We've got these two characters, really. Yeah. The house itself is a character.
The house itself, I suppose, is a character. There's the girl who's never given a name. Perhaps she's a manifestation of the house itself. But again, there's several things that are going on. And there's and a part of it is this idea of that you want something so badly that you'll never be able to find it. And there's a degree of humor in making a book about looking for things, because everybody in my family knows that I'm about the worst person in the world at finding anything. They mock me because one time, and it did actually happen, I couldn't find the other end of a hose. And in my defense, that hose went under a boat and then up and over a fence. And so I lost the trail of the boat. But I just thought, there is something funny about not being very good at looking for things, because it's quite clear that these ghosts are right there and this girl just cannot see them. But then it becomes obvious that these ghosts don't actually want to be found, and they're having a little bit of fun with that.
And the thing that I found interesting is that you don't repeat the same thing through using that technique. It does evolve and change. And so you're kind of guessing as a reader as to what's going to happen. What starts out as an initial surprise later, as you get through, becomes a different kind of guessing and working out where those ghosts are going to be. I loved that.
Yeah, I think actually for the first two times it happens, you don't notice it happening. So when you do notice it, then you're like, wait a minute, was that there all along? And then you go back and you're like, oh yeah, it was. So there's an absolute subtlety to this. And there's such a tactile nature to the book that people were asking for some Zoom events about, can we get a PDF of it? And I was like, no, it just doesn't translate. This is an object to be held in your hands. Whenever I was reading it to my kids and their cousins at an early stage, they started doing something that I didn't predict. They started trying to guess where the ghosts were going to be before I turned the page. And I loved that. It became playful for them. But, if I've managed to get a ghost appearing behind a child in a mirror in the bathroom, which is about one of the creepiest things I can imagine, but it's done in a way, and it's an old Victorian bathroom, but it's done in a way that is So there's sort of an underwriting current of macabre to it, but it's ultimately quite funny.
Yeah. There are some clues there. Paintings and portraits are quite important in this book. And I know that you've had a long-running art project with portraits and interviewing people, dipping portraits in paint. And here the portraits are quite important. I think quite early on, there's an image of one that looks as though it could be like a Joshua Reynolds portrait of two children, very sort of, you don't see it clearly, but that's the feeling that you're getting from it.
Well, it is actually. I think it might be a Joshua Reynolds, but it was from, so a lot of the rooms, when I was sort of storyboarding it out, there had to be a certain kind of momentum to it, left to right, up, down, so on and so forth. So the rooms had to be quite specific in the end. None of these rooms are actually from the same book. I've been collecting old architectural reference books and furniture catalogs for quite some time. And so while some of them are just absolutely lifted wholesale, a lot of the rest, I've had to take a little bit from here and a little bit from there. So I've had the opportunity to have a bit of fun with that. And yeah, the portrait of the kids at the top of the stairs there, I think there's again, little just sort of nuggets for potential sub-narratives that go off in different directions.
Yeah. And also some of the portraits later get eyes on them.
Yes. They start watching as like the ghosts kind of come in and out through those things. Yeah.
And the final portrait, although I won't say too much about it, the final portrait is one where we see the face clearly, and we haven't seen faces that clearly on the portraits in the rest of the book. Is that somebody specific in that portrait?
I think it might be. If you're talking about a real person, no.
We'll leave it there.
Yes. Yeah. There's another very subtle ending that when I've been showing it to people, almost all of them don't get it. And so I think I've been way too subtle.
Ooh. There's also an ending if you think of the back jacket as well, which is a sort of inversion of the front jacket, and who's looking out from upstairs and downstairs.
Yes, exactly. But if you lift up that back flap and look at the inside end paper, a lot of people don't notice that.
Yes. You have to take the jacket off, don't you? You have to look underneath the jacket.
Yeah, you do.
Just going back to portraits for a moment, were you partly thinking about your portrait project when you were doing this book as well?
I mean, a lot of the tentacles of various projects of mine worked their way in and out of other ones. And so, yes, I have a certain sensibility of the portraits, and they tell a certain story. So I wasn't trying to directly relate to that, but just that as a piece of visual language in my work, the tone of it was definitely the same, because that project is about memory and identity and storytelling. And that's what this book is about too. So without trying to draw a direct correlation between them, the inclusion of the portrait in this is a sort of subtle nod to the similar themes that they both explore.
And I suppose if you're a creator of one kind or of another, you never completely leave one project behind. You sort of build and accumulate. Your thinking accumulates.
No project ever really starts in isolation, finishes in isolation. There's through lines that go through everything. It's like some of the fine art projects I'm working on right now had their starting points before even here we are, but kind of worked their way through here we are and are keeping going. So yeah, it's almost like a river, and every so often you dip a bucket down and you pull something out. That thing that you pull out might be a book or a project or a painting, but it's coming from the same place.
Can we talk about the house a little bit? Because I was really intrigued where the snippets of information came from and some specific dating of things. The house was built in around 1760. You reference a Queen Anne chair in there. Paintings have that sort of Georgian feel to them. That doorway, and of course I accept that I might not be right, but the doorway, I was just in Dublin the minute I saw that doorway. Yeah. So tell us about the house. I got a feeling it was about history.
So, the photographs are coming from everywhere. I've always tried to do that, even in the Great Paper Caper. The phone box is a British phone box. The police car is a New York old-fashioned police car. The police uniform is an Australian police uniform. So I lift little references from everywhere, so not anyone in particular. My sister-in-law Katie was having several spinal surgeries a couple of years ago, and she had to go to Rhode Island just because that's where the best help was at that point. And Rhode Island all of the architecture there is of that certain era, and it's all those great big houses that look like the Addams Family house, and that's kind of where it totally comes from. And if you look at the house on the front, it's based partly on like the Widow Watch of those houses, where the wife would have gone up to watch out for her husband coming home from sea. But it is also partly based on a house or a couple of different houses from Belfast, because all of the houses in Rhode Island are timber, but this is brick. This house is brick. So I sort of mixed that up. And the rest of them are coming from architectural reference books, mostly from New England, Massachusetts, around there, from houses from the 1700s to the 1850s. And then some of the interiors are slightly more contemporary, from like the 30s to the 40s, but are all sort of played in together. And yeah, you're picking those up absolutely correctly.
You've got the playfulness of the ghost, which we'll talk about in a moment, but the house, there's this kind of interplay, as I was saying earlier, between reassuring and quite creepy. And if you look at the house on its own, it's incredibly creepy.
Yes.
The way that you're playing with dark and light and shadow and mirrors.
Yes, it is. And it's I had to tap into that part of my memory that was fascinated by these old empty creepy houses when I was growing up. So there's some of Chas Adams illustrations in there. There is some of the Addams Family, the Munsters, things like that. A lot of that, the classic creepy house that would have been the backdrop of my childhood. So I had I feel like I'd have been doing myself a disservice if I hadn't filtered some of that through. But that it lent itself to a beautiful palette, really, and a lot of fun to be had. I was like, how creepy can these backgrounds be, and still be taking the edge off when the characters go in?
Where does the text itself come from? It looks like estate agent catalogs or something.
Oh, yeah. Some of it is. Some of it I've made up, and some of it is actually from the book. I wanted to look like this is a catalog for an old house that is being documented, and this story is just that is interplaying through it. So it's almost devoid of personality in some ways. So yes, like the central hall plan reached the peak achievement in the superb hallways of the remarkable house built in 1760. Oh, very, very boring. But then whenever you get to the ones like the attic now serves as a storeroom for old chairs, books, and a covered tall boy. These images needed a separation between them. So I took lines that just would do the job of describing what was there, but without doing too much else, just as a visual separation, and kind of to remind people of just the descriptive thing that if you choose to, you can see there is nothing happening here at all.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how the different threads of the story started to come together for you, and when? I
think the first thing is I've often collected things that look like they're the background of something else to paint on top of. So that's why I was collecting photographs of old empty rooms without knowing what I was going to do with them. That's the same with the disaster paintings that I work on, where I find these old oil paintings and I paint in the first thing that occurs to me, which is often a Titanic sinking or some sort of plane stuck on a tree or something like that. So there was that. And a game that I played with myself, with kids, is if you paint a ghost into some of these rooms, you can like move it around. And I always thought that was fun. So that was there at the background for quite some time. And then I had written this story, and I hadn't actually paired it with this style yet. And the story was about this girl. And in a way, I thought that she might be the ghost. And we sort of gradually dawned on us as we went through that. And then I was like, it reeks too much of that, the Sixth Sense book. And so it's funny, is I was actually talking with Neil Gaiman when he came by the studio, and I was showing him this. It was like, I just can't quite pick the lock. But he didn't see it the same way that I did. He, from the start, automatically assumed that the ghosts were hiding from her deliberately. And it was like sort of this, this lock being unpicked. And so there was lots of different strands like that coming together. And then just the idea of selecting that classic white sheet, 2 holes for eyes ghost. It makes it generic. So there's not too much of a personality. It's more about what they're doing and the ideas of it than any character, so to speak.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about the making of the book. If we start with the kind of montage idea, you've not hidden that. You've not tried to make the photographs have that modern, realistic feel. They've got the dots in that you get when you...
Some do, yeah. That comes from, because these are all printed anywhere from 100 to 50 years ago. And so when you scan and resize those dots, you do get that sort of color halftone distortion, which I tried to minimize this to some because it creates weird patterns if you get it wrong. But yeah, that's just from the old books. It's almost been collaged with a scalpel, and things have just been cut out and sort of replaced. And then it was above my pay grade in Photoshop, making some of them fit a bit better. So I had to get some help in for that.
So should we talk about the transparency? But I think they're semi-opaque rather than semi-transparent. They have to have a whiteness to them for it to work,
yes.
Don't they?
Yes, I think it's the glass is half full, the glass is half empty. But, when I was playing with these in my sketchbook, I was using something called Mylar. It's how an awful lot of lithography is done, and you paint on this, and it's like it's an old material, but it's almost like an architectural tracing paper, but it's smooth. There's a plastic in it rather than just wood pulp, and so it's more transparent than this, but more consistently transparent. It's a strange effect, and I was hoping that I could make the book on that, but on the slightest bit of costing and scrutiny, it became completely impractical. Completely. So, and also using that much plastic in a book just sort of goes against my core values. So we tried to find the right tracing paper that had enough opacity, but also had enough tooth to it, enough weight to it, so that it wouldn't just wrinkle. And then the most complicated part came from realizing that ideally the story initially was going to be room on the left, text on the right, tracing paper in between. But to do that, you would have had to glue the tracing paper in, and that just didn't look good. And so then we tried to work out, well, what's the best way to actually make this book so it doesn't look like that? And the way a book is made is that there's sheets of 4 and they're folded in 2, and then so you get like little mini booklets within a booklet and they're stitched together. So we thought, well, what if we could weave in a full sheet of tracing paper in and around those groups of 4? And that is why you've got this strange structure of some pages have no tracing paper and some pages have 2 pieces of tracing paper. And then it was my goal, and this maybe took the longest, is how do I make this story, the structure of the story, flow around the structure of this book? So, for example, when you get to a certain point where there won't be tracing paper, what do you do? And that became a really enjoyable and satisfying challenge. And that's why, for example, when it's the staircase and she's looking under the stairs, but they're very hard to see, that's the first hint that you get that the ghosts are playing with you and having fun. You turn the first sheet of tracing paper and you see them running up the stairs, and then you turn the second sheet of tracing paper and you see them laughing. So that served the purpose in the book. And I think it works so well that whenever I showed this to some people, they were like, wow, your publisher must really love you to put in 2 sheets of tracing paper in a row like that for a small joke. And I was like, so that it did work. But that's why we had to create then the rooms with the joiner spreads, as I call them, where there couldn't be any tracing paper. So that's just grey, and she's just sort of working her way through the house. And that became a wonderful opportunity to sort of connect the rooms of the house and just have a little doorway here, a little doorway there, and some stairs. And so I do sometimes think that the best ideas can come from obstacles and trying to figure out your way around obstacles. And that's certainly the case for this book.
Really interesting. What was I'll tell you what my favourite ghost bit is.
Okay.
You know where you're in the bathroom and there's a towel hanging over.
Yeah, that's my favourite ghost bit too.
I love that because it's there in plain view.
Yeah.
And you don't see it.
Until you turn the sheet of paper. The funny thing is that as I was doing some sketches, I would just take these empty rooms and I would just paint a straight ghost, not doing anything straight on top. And I loved how it looked, just, how big they were. And there's nothing like that in the book because it didn't serve the story anywhere. And actually in experimenting for this, I started working on just putting different ghosts in different rooms. And so I actually have a whole secondary project that has spun out of this, which is more like a fine art exhibit that's going to be happening in New York, where the girl doesn't make an appearance at all. It's just all these different ghosts sort of sitting contemplatively in these empty rooms. And a part of it was, history books are filled with glorious battles and heroes who have been sacrificed and, glamour and everything. But the vast majority of everybody's life is spent doing very ordinary, very monotonous things. And if that is how we spend our life, if there is an afterlife, what's to say that that's not what the afterlife would be like? And in a way of showing these ghosts just thinking very boring thoughts and doing very boring activities, into the evermore. Will that raise the question in ourselves about how is it that we'll spend the time that we actually do have alive?
Absolutely. The other thing that I felt was that it was very theatrical in a way. I don't know if you know the theatre company Punch Drunk. They do immersive kind of theatre and you participate. But it had that feel where you wander around and you might not even see much of the acting. But even when there aren't actors there, just the being in the house is the drama itself.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's a choose your own adventure, and that that's a much more like life than sit in this chair and be entertained. You get out what you put in, you find what you participate in, and there is an element of that. But actually, you know what? You were just asking what's my favorite ghost moment in this. My favorite ghost moment in this whole book is on the title page. So there's a ghost in this house is the title, and then there's an asterisk. And then the asterisk refers you to something at the very bottom of the title page, which says afraid of ghosts. And so there's afraid of ghosts in this house because the collective noun for a group of ghosts is afraid of ghosts. I saw that and I was like, I am going with that.
It's good. Yeah. I'd like to talk about some of the other design aspects, like the shape of the book. I mean, you have a choice to make, don't you, when you create a book like this? Yeah. Am I going to make a tall book, a square book?
It could only be a tall and thin book. And especially the creepiest parts of old houses are up in the rafters, up at the top. And even we just moved into a new house in Northern Ireland and there's 3 floors and we don't really go up to the top floor, so the lights are never on. So our children have started calling it the darkness. So this book only ever could be a tall book.
Yeah. Is the artwork that you produced, is it all on computer or have you got...
No. So actually, that's a really good question. I wanted it to look like I painted the girl straight into these rooms, right? But only in 3 or 4 of the examples that the room exists and they weren't exactly that size. And the one thing I don't like doing is if you paint something at a different size and then rescale it, the brushstrokes don't match for continuity. So what I ended up doing for the girl and for the original art, so to speak, is that I would get these files of the rooms and then I worked with a printer in Northern Ireland and I had them printed on watercolor paper. They weren't perfect, but it was enough for me to paint the girl on situ into that room. And then I scanned those and it was more straightforward to remove the girl from a background that was very, very basically identical to the one it was going to be placed on. And then I dropped it back into the original scan of the room itself rather than the print of the scan. So the cover is totally hand painted. There's a bunch of pencil drawings where I pick out one detail and expound upon it. That all lives in real life. And then, there's whatever it is, 26 large printed pieces of watercolor paper with the original painting on top of it.
And the white paint that you had to use to get the right opacity.
This is another one you're gonna find very strange. The originals of the ghost are black. They had to be black because they need the information. Because if you scan white against black, it would scan the black, not the white. And so I had to invert it. And then when it's you drop it into the book, you just tell the printer has to know that the density of this color needs to be white ink.
Clever stuff. Can I ask you as well, because the whole layout and the design of the book, it's so gorgeous, and that comes down to things like the placing of the type on the page, the typography, and the little elements that you've picked out for the bottom right-hand corner, mainly sort of furniture, lights. Most of them are a detail from the main image. Was there any thought process as to what you were going to pull out, or were they just objects that you liked?
It was just a little bit of almost, picking out the monotony of the scene. So one thing that's sort of there that just is, look, I'm celebrating the detail of what's happening. And of course, there's this drama unfolding, but the details being picked out is just some boring little thing in the corner. And again, it just sort of adds to that there's nothing here happening at all if you choose to look at it that way.
Interesting. And what about the typography?
The typography is actually my handwriting, but I didn't want it to just be my handwriting anymore. And so I printed the book out using the same font from a lot of the catalogs that I was seeing. There was sort of a similar-ish font that seemed to be consistent throughout many of them. And so I printed out big, and then I just copied it with my hand so that there was was not quite perfect. You were like, okay, the typographers in the room wouldn't be able to place their fingers on what the font was, but it still had that sort of personal quality, but yet it also wasn't exactly handwriting.
Sorry, I've just got sidetracked by the swinging chandelier, which I love as well. That's another way in which you're going to get a clue here, is in that picture, not just transparency.
But you were hitting on something earlier on. It was like, a lot of the geographical reference and timing of these is of a certain place in history at a certain place in time. And that's, the Salem and the Salem witch trials. And so much of this book is about looking for something and not being able to find it and sort of becoming increasingly desperate. And in a way, that's exactly what was happening during the Salem witch trials, which there was a sort of a hysteria and a desperation that people were finding things that weren't actually there at all. And so there's a parallel drawn to that for sure.
And is that something that struck you from reading or from actually being in? Did you visit?
We did. We visited Salem. It's one of my favorite photographs. Is my wife sat on a park bench and they were wearing all black. She's got long black hair, and it was in the build up to Halloween. And when she came out, she didn't notice, but there was a bunch of women dressed up as witches that had gathered around her, and she fit in perfectly with them. But yes, and doing that, there was just such a sort of a sad tragedy about the whole thing. About there's flows in my work that are constant, and so much of it is about wanting to be understood and wanting to understand, and how the two things often get in the way of each other, and that definitely plays into this, and just this notion of the unknown and being right and protecting yourself from fear, and just whenever you sort of smash all these things together, the consequences that can come from that.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate the time that you've given me today, Oliver.
Of course.
There's a Ghost in This House is out this week, and our podcast will be soon too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nikki. All the best.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please do leave a review for us. To find out about other projects, including an audience with events and the Exploring Children's Literature Summer School, visit www.exploringchildrensliterature.uk. Join us again soon in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.